The scent of cardamom and cinnamon filled the palace kitchen as Parvati Nair carefully stirred the simmering tea. Steam rose in lazy curls above the silver pot, carrying the perfume of far-off spice roots to the farthest corners of the cavernous room. Her slender fingers worked deftly, measuring precious ingredients with the precision of someone who understood that in the British Raj, even a cup of tea carried the weight of empire. "Mind you don't spill a drop," Mrs. Higgins, the head of kitchen staff, warned as she bustled past. "His Royal Highness is particular about his chai." Parvati nodded, though she knew Prince Henry's preferences better than anyone in the palace. 3 years as kitchen assistant had taught her the exact moment to remove the tea from the flame, the precise amount of honey that should be drizzled in, and how to pour it so the aroma would reach His Highness before the cup did. What she never mentioned was how carefully she watched his face when he took the first sip, the brief closing of eyes, the slight nod of approval, the momentary escape from royal burdens. The Viceroy's palace in Delhi stood as a monument to British dominion, its grand hallways and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the dusty, vibrant streets beyond its walls. For Prince Henry Ellington, third son of King George V, sent to India to strengthen imperial ties, it was both prison and sanctuary. For Parvati, daughter of a respected Indian scholar who had fallen on hard times after speaking against colonial policies, it was merely a place to earn her keep. "The prince is returning from his morning ride," announced Jenkins, the butler's assistant, as he swept into the kitchen. "He's requested tea on the eastern veranda." Parvati arranged the silver service with practiced care, the delicate porcelain cups from England, the small silver spoons that had once belonged to some Maharaja, now repurposed for British lips. As she carried the tray through the winding corridors of the palace, she kept her eyes lowered, a posture of deference she had mastered. The eastern veranda overlooked gardens where peacocks strutted between carefully tended rose bushes imported from England. Prince Henry stood at the balustrade, still in his riding clothes, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. At 28, he carried himself with the rigid posture of one born to duty, though his eyes, a stormy grey that reminded Parvati of monsoon clouds, often betrayed a restlessness that no amount of royal breeding could disguise. "Your tea, Your Highness," she murmured, placing the tray on the marble table. Henry turned, and for a moment, their eyes met. It was forbidden, of course, a servant girl looking directly at royalty, but in that brief instant, something passed between them, an acknowledgement that transcended the strict boundaries of their stations. "Thank you, Miss Nair," he said, using her name rather than the customary dismissive nod. "I've been looking forward to this all morning." Parvati felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's a new blend, Your Highness. With a touch of saffron. You've been experimenting again." A smile touched his lips, softening the aristocratic angles of his face. "Only slightly, Your Highness. I thought, after your long ride. It smells divine." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Would you explain the process to me? I find myself curious about these things." The request was unprecedented. Servants did not sit with royalty, they certainly did not discuss their craft as equals. Yet something in his expression, a gentle insistence, perhaps, or simply weariness of protocol, made her hesitate only briefly before taking the offered seat. "It begins with selecting the leaves," she said softly. "The best come from Darjeeling, though many prefer Assam for its strength." As she spoke, Prince Henry watched her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but instead felt like recognition. For nearly an hour, they talked about tea, at first, then about spices, then about the markets of Delhi where vendors called out their wares in a dozen languages. He asked questions about her knowledge of local customs, and she found herself speaking more freely than she had in years. "You've studied these matters deeply," he observed when she explained the medicinal properties of certain blends. "My father was a scholar," she replied, then added carefully, "Before." "Before what, Miss Nair?" The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. To speak of her father's fall from grace, his writings against British rule, would be to remind the prince of the gulf between them, not just of rank, but of worlds in collision. Before circumstances changed, she said finally. He taught at Delhi University. He believed knowledge should be shared across all boundaries. Something in Prince Henry's expression shifted, a shadow of understanding. A revolutionary idea, in some circles. All ideas can be revolutionary, Your Highness, depending on who hears them. He laughed then, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Well said, Miss Nair. I shall remember that. When Jenkins appeared at the veranda entrance, clearing his throat with pointed emphasis, Parvati rose immediately. The spell was broken. She was once again a servant, he once again royalty. Thank you for the tea, Prince Henry said as she gathered the tray. And the conversation. She bowed her head and retreated, feeling the weight of Jenkins' disapproving gaze following her. Such interactions were dangerous, for her position, certainly, but perhaps for more than that. She had seen something in the prince's eyes, something that whispered of possibilities that had no place in her carefully constructed world of survival. That evening, as Parvati helped prepare dinner for the Viceroy's elaborate gathering, Mrs. Higgins appeared at her side, face pinched with worry. The prince has requested you prepare a special tea service for his private study after dinner, she said, her voice low. What have you done to attract such notice? Nothing, Mrs. Higgins. I only served him tea this morning. The older woman's eyes narrowed. See that it remains nothing. Men of his station do not see women of yours as equals, whatever pleasantries they may offer. Parvati understood the warning all too well. Her own mother had been a beauty in her youth, and the attention of British officers had never led to anything but heartache. Yet as she prepared a small tray with the prince's preferred blend later that evening, she could not help but remember the way he had listened to her, truly listened, as though her words carried weight. The prince's study was a modest room by royal standards, lined with bookshelves and furnished with deep leather chairs that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. When Parvati entered after a soft knock, she found Prince Henry seated at his desk, papers spread before him, his formal evening attire exchanged for a simpler smoking jacket. Ah, Miss Nair. He looked up, and the weariness in his face gave way to something warmer. Thank you for coming. It is my duty, Your Highness. Is it duty that makes your tea superior to any I've tasted in England or India? He asked, motioning for her to set the tray on a small table near the window. Or something else? Parvati arranged the cups carefully. Perhaps it is simply that I pay attention to what pleases you. And what pleases you, Miss Nair? The question caught her off guard, intimate in its directness. No one had asked about her preferences in years, certainly not someone of his stature. I find satisfaction in work well done, Your Highness. A diplomatic answer. He smiled slightly. But not, I think, a complete one. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Once again, she found herself seated in his presence, a breach of protocol that should have terrified her but instead felt like stepping into a secret garden, dangerous, beautiful, hidden from the eyes of the world. I've been reading, he said, indicating a stack of books at his elbow. About India. Not the official histories or policy papers, but works by Indian scholars. I wonder if you might recognize some names. He lifted the top volume, and Parvati's heart stuttered. The author's name, embossed in gold on the leather cover, was one she knew intimately, Dr. Rajiv Nair, her father. You know this work? Prince Henry asked, watching her face. Yes, she whispered. My father wrote it. Before he was accused of sedition. The admission hung in the air between them, a confession that could cost her position, perhaps worse. Yet Prince Henry nodded, as though confirming something he had already suspected. It's brilliantly argued, he said. His analysis of how traditional governance structures could be preserved while allowing for greater local autonomy, it's unlike anything I was taught at Cambridge. Parvati stared at him, unable to mask her surprise. You agree with his ideas. I find them compelling. And troubling, in equal measure. He leaned forward. Your father was imprisoned briefly, then released under restriction, is that correct? Yes. He cannot teach, cannot publish. We lost our home. My mother. She stopped, unwilling to speak of how grief and humiliation had taken her mother's health, then her life. And you came to work in the Viceroy's palace. His voice softened. A daughter of a scholar reduced to serving tea to the very people who silenced her father. We all serve something, Your Highness, she replied, meeting his gaze. Some serve empire, some serve family, some serve ideals. The form matters less than the dignity with which one serves. Something in his expression changed then, a recognition that she had spoken not as a servant but as an equal. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. I would like to meet your father, Prince Henry said finally. Not officially, of course. But I have questions only he might answer. The request was extraordinary, reckless even. A British prince seeking out a disgraced Indian academic, it could lead to scandal, to political complications, to danger for all involved. It would be difficult to arrange, Your Highness. Yet not impossible. Hope flickered in his eyes. Not impossible, she conceded, wondering what forces she was setting in motion with those simple words. That night, Parvati wrote a letter to her father, careful with her phrasing, explaining that a British gentleman of influence wished to discuss his academic work privately. She knew her father would understand the need for discretion. Years of political precariousness had taught the Nair family the value of cautious words. Over the following weeks, as arrangements were made through whispered conversations and coded messages, Parvati continued to serve Prince Henry his daily tea. Their interactions, once formal and brief, now carried an undercurrent of conspiracy. Each time she entered his presence, whether in the public space of the veranda or the privacy of his study, their eyes would meet in silent confirmation that they shared something beyond the ritual of tea service. Tell me about the festival I saw in the city yesterday, he asked one afternoon as monsoon rains lashed against the palace windows. The streets were filled with color. And so Parvati explained Holi, the spring festival of colors, describing how in her childhood, before British sensibilities had tempered such exuberant celebrations among the educated classes, she had run through narrow streets while neighbors tossed vibrant powders that stained skin and clothing alike. It represents the triumph of good over evil, she explained, but also the joy that comes with spring, with renewal. I should like to experience it properly someday, Prince Henry said, his expression wistful. Not as an observer behind a carriage window, but as a participant. It would be difficult for someone of your position, Your Highness. Yes, my position. A shadow crossed his face. Always my position. In those moments, Parvati glimpsed the man beneath the royal title, someone constrained by duty and tradition just as surely as she was limited by her status and gender. It was a strange realization that the prince might envy her freedom to walk through Delhi's markets unnoticed, even as she had once envied his privilege. On a humid evening in late August, when the air hung heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, Parvati led Prince Henry through the narrow streets of Old Delhi. He was dressed simply, in clothes that might belong to a moderately prosperous merchant, his distinctive features partially obscured by a loosely wrapped turban. They moved quietly, followed at a discreet distance by a single royal guard disguised as a servant, the minimum protection Henry had agreed to after heated argument with his security detail. No one will look twice at a man and woman walking together, he asked softly as they navigated the crowded lanes. They will assume we are married, she replied, then blushed at the implication. Or perhaps siblings. Either way, we attract less attention together than you would alone. Her father's modest home was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where intellectuals and artists had once gathered freely. Now, under the weight of increased British scrutiny, such gatherings were rare and guarded. When they arrived, Rajiv Nair was waiting in the small courtyard, silver hair and thin but with eyes that burned with the same intelligence Parvati had inherited. "Father," she said in Hindi, "this is the gentleman I wrote of." Her father rose, studying Prince Henry with a scholar's assessment. When he spoke, it was in perfect, Oxford-accented English. "Your Highness honors our humble home." Prince Henry started, then smiled ruefully. "My disguise is not as effective as I'd hoped." "Few disguises are, to those who know what to look for," Rajiv replied. "Please, be seated. We have much to discuss, and the night grows no younger for ceremony." What followed was unlike any conversation Parvati had witnessed. Her father and the prince spoke as intellectual equals, debating governance, history, the complex relationship between India and Britain. Prince Henry asked probing questions about local administrative structures, about educational systems, about how traditional authority might be preserved while allowing for greater self-determination. "You speak as though you expect to influence policy," Rajiv observed after several hours of discussion. "I am my father's third son," Prince Henry replied with a self-deprecating smile. "My influence is limited. But not, I hope, non-existent." "And why do you seek this knowledge?" "Curiosity? Academic interest?" "I seek it because what I have been taught cannot be reconciled with what I see," Henry said simply. "And because I cannot in good conscience continue to represent a system I do not fully understand." Rajiv nodded slowly. "Understanding is the beginning of change, Your Highness. But change without action is merely philosophy." As they prepared to leave, Rajiv pressed a manuscript into Prince Henry's hands. "My latest work. Unpublished, of course. Perhaps never to be published in my lifetime. But I would value your thoughts." The gesture, an Indian intellectual sharing forbidden political writings with a British prince, was so extraordinary that for a moment, no one spoke. Then Henry bowed, a gesture of respect rarely offered by royalty. "I am honored by your trust, Dr. Nair. I will guard it carefully." As they made their way back through the darkened streets, Prince Henry walked closer to Parvati than protocol would ever permit in daylight. Their hands occasionally brushed, sending currents of awareness through her that she struggled to suppress. "Your father is a remarkable man," he said softly. "I understand now where you learned your quiet strength." "He has suffered for his convictions," she replied. "Yet never abandoned them. A rare quality." He glanced at her profile in the dim light of the street lamps. "Though perhaps not so rare in your family." Over the following months, Prince Henry returned to Rajiv Nair's home several times, always in disguise, always with Parvati as his guide. Between these visits, their own relationship deepened in ways neither acknowledged openly. She continued to serve his tea, but now he often asked her to stay, to discuss books he was reading or to explain nuances of Indian culture that confounded him. In his presence, Parvati found herself rediscovering aspects of herself long suppressed by circumstance, her love of poetry, her sharp political insights, her capacity for laughter. And in her company, Prince Henry seemed to shed the weight off his royal obligations, becoming simply a man with curious mind and gentle heart. "You've never asked me about England," he remarked one day as they sat in his study, rain pattering against the windows. "About my home, my family." Parvati considered this. "I thought perhaps it might pain you to speak of what you've left behind. Or perhaps you've simply had enough of England and its ways," he suggested with a wry smile. "England is not just its empire, Your Highness. Just as India is not merely a jewel in Britain's crown." "Henry," he said suddenly. "When we are alone like this, I wish you would call me Henry." The request hung between them, intimate and dangerous. To use his given name would be to acknowledge that they had moved beyond the boundaries of servant and master, beyond even the careful friendship they had cultivated. "I cannot," she whispered. "Cannot? Or will not?" "Both." She met his gaze steadily. Some boundaries protect us both. He leaned forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. And if I wish to cross those boundaries? If I have already crossed them in my heart? The word sent a tremor through her. Then you place us both in peril, Your Highness. Henry, he insisted softly. Say it once, Parvati. Just once. She closed her eyes, feeling the precipice before her. Henry, she breathed, the name foreign yet familiar on her tongue. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with an expression that made her heart race, tenderness mixed with something deeper, more urgent. Again, he murmured. We must not, she said, rising abruptly. This, whatever this is between us, it cannot exist in the world we inhabit. Then perhaps we must change that world. Even you, with all your power, cannot change the Empire's view of women like me. His expression hardened with determination. Watch me. 2 days later, Parvati was summoned to the Viceroy's office, a circumstance so unprecedented that she felt certain she was about to be dismissed. Perhaps someone had observed her growing closeness to the prince, perhaps her father's political past had finally caught up with her. She smoothed her simple sari with trembling hands before entering the imposing chamber. The Viceroy, Lord Carmichael, sat behind a massive desk, his expression unreadable. To his right stood Prince Henry, formal in his military uniform, his face a mask of royal composure. Miss Nair, the Viceroy began, it has come to my attention that you possess unusual qualifications. She kept her eyes lowered. So? Prince Henry informs me that you are fluent in several Indian languages, well versed in local customs, and the daughter of a noted scholar. The Viceroy's tone revealed nothing of his thoughts on these matters. He has recommended you for a position of some sensitivity. Parvati glanced at Prince Henry, who gave her the slightest of nods. The prince will be undertaking a tour of the northern provinces, Lord Carmichael continued. He has requested that you accompany the diplomatic party as a cultural liaison and interpreter. The offer was astonishing, a leap across hierarchies that defied convention. Such a position would normally go to an educated Indian man of appropriate caste and connection, never to a woman who had been serving tea. This is highly irregular, the Viceroy added, his displeasure evident despite his measured tone. However, His Royal Highness has been most insistent. It would be an honor to serve in any capacity that might benefit relations between our peoples, Parvati replied carefully, falling back on diplomatic phrasing to hide her confusion. Very well. The Viceroy nodded curtly. You will be briefed on your duties tomorrow. That will be all. Outside the office, Parvati waited in the corridor until Prince Henry emerged. When they were momentarily alone, she turned to him with questioning eyes. What have you done? She whispered. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. I've merely recognized talent where I found it. Is that not what good governance requires? This is dangerous, she warned. For both of us. Less dangerous than continuing as we were, he countered. Now you will be seen in my company officially, properly. No one will question why we speak together. They will question everything else, she said. My qualifications, my background, my proximity to you. Let them question. His voice softened. I need you with me, Parvati. Not just for your skills, though they are considerable, but because you help me see clearly what others would obscure. The northern tour began 2 weeks later, a carefully orchestrated procession through princely states and British-administered territories. Officially, Prince Henry was strengthening diplomatic ties, representing the Crown's continued commitment to India. Unofficially, he was conducting what amounted to a quiet investigation of colonial practices, guided by Parvati's insights and her father's writings. In her new role, Parvati wore finer clothes, ate at the same tables as British officials, and spoke directly to rulers and administrators. The transformation from kitchen servant to diplomatic staff raised eyebrows, but Prince Henry's obvious respect for her opinions gradually earned her a measure of reluctant acceptance from the British contingent. More significant were the changes she observed in Henry himself. Away from Delhi's strict court, he spoke more openly about reforms, listened more attentively to local concerns, and increasingly sought opportunities to experience India beyond official functions, visiting schools, markets, temples. "You're placing yourself at risk," she told him one evening as they reviewed notes in his private quarters, a practice that would have been scandalous in Delhi but was accepted as necessary work during their travels. "Some of these observations, if included in your report to London, will ruffle feathers." He smiled. "Good. Some feathers need ruffling. It could affect your position, your future." "My position has afforded me privileges all my life," he replied, suddenly serious. "What good is such privilege if not used to effect change where change is needed?" She studied him, this prince who had somehow become both more and less than his title in her eyes. "What changed you? You arrived in India every inch the imperial representative." He considered this, then said quietly, "Perhaps it was tasting your tea." "My tea. It was the first thing about India that made me stop and truly pay attention. Something so familiar, tea, made extraordinary through different hands, different traditions." He moved closer to her. "And then I began to listen to the hands that prepared it." The air between them thickened with unspoken feelings. They had maintained careful distance throughout the tour, professional in public, cautiously friendly in private. But here, in the dim light of his quarters, with only the sounds of the night beyond the windows, the distance felt like an artificial construct neither truly wanted. "Henry," she said softly, no longer pretending this was about diplomacy or cultural exchange. He touched her cheek, a gentle brush of fingers that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through her. "I have tried to fight this," he confessed. "Told myself it was impossible, impractical, forbidden by every convention of both our worlds." "It is all those things," she whispered. "And yet—" His eyes held hers. "Here we are." Their first kiss was tentative, a meeting of worlds as much as lips. Then Parvati's arms went around his neck, and Henry pulled her closer, and caution gave way to a hunger neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Later, as they lay entwined on his bed, Henry traced the curve of her shoulder with reverent fingers. "I love you," he said simply. "Beyond reason, beyond duty, beyond the expectations of crown or country." Parvati pressed her forehead to his chest, overwhelmed by feelings she had no name for in any of the languages she spoke. Joy and terror, hope and despair, how could such opposites exist simultaneously in one heart? "This cannot last," she said finally. "When we return to Delhi, we will find a way," he interrupted. "I am not giving you up, Parvati. Not for crown or country or convention." She raised her head to look at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know that loving you has taught me more about courage than all my years of military training." The remainder of the tour was a delicate balance between public duty and private passion. By day, they were Prince Henry and Miss Nair, diplomatic partners navigating the complex political landscape of northern India. By night, they were simply Henry and Parvati, discovering each other's bodies, sharing dreams and fears, building a fragile paradise they both knew could not last. Their return to Delhi approached with the inevitability of monsoon clouds gathering on the horizon. On their final evening away, in the guest palace of a sympathetic Maharaja who had taken a liking to Henry's progressive views, they sat together on a balcony overlooking gardens illuminated by paper lanterns. "I've been corresponding with my father," Henry said, taking her hand. "And with certain progressive members of Parliament." Parvati felt a flutter of apprehension. About my future. About possibilities." He turned to face her fully. "I am not the heir. My brother David will be king after my father. I have more flexibility in my choices." Even princes have obligations, she reminded him gently. Yes. But those obligations need not preclude happiness. He took a deep breath. There is precedent for royals marrying outside expected circles. Not common precedent, certainly, but our marriage. Parvati's heart seemed to stop. Henry, you cannot possibly. I can. I will. His grip on her hand tightened. It would mean changes for both of us. I would likely need to renounce certain succession rights, though those are theoretical at best. You would face scrutiny, prejudice, perhaps worse. The Empire would never accept an Indian as a royal consort, she whispered. The Empire is changing, he countered. Slowly, painfully, but changing nonetheless. And we can be part of that change, Parvati. Together. The enormity of what he proposed left her speechless. Marriage to a prince, not a fairy tale fantasy of royal balls and tiaras, but a political act that would challenge the very foundations of imperial hierarchy. Your family, she began. Will adapt, he said firmly. My mother may surprise you with her open-mindedness. My father. He hesitated. Will come to understand, in time. And if they don't? Henry's expression grew solemn. Then I will have lost something precious. But not as precious as what I would lose by letting you go. Their return to Delhi brought an immediate return to formality in public, though Henry arranged for Parvati to continue in her diplomatic role rather than returning to kitchen service. Rumors swirled about their relationship, fed by the unusual amount of time they spent in private consultation, but the Viceroy's staff maintained rigorous propriety in all official matters. What no one in the palace knew was that Henry had already set in motion plans that would either secure their future together or end his royal career. Letters flew between Delhi and London, carried by trusted couriers. Rajiv Nair was brought into their confidence, his scholar's mind helping to craft arguments that might sway even the most traditional royal advisers. It will not be easy, Rajiv warned his daughter one evening in the privacy of his home. You will belong fully to neither world. I already belong to neither world, she replied. At least with Henry, I would belong to someone who sees me truly. Her father's eyes softened. And you love him? Not the prince, but the man. With everything I am, she said simply. Then fight for that love, he told her. But do so with open eyes. Autumn came to Delhi, bringing cooler air and news from London. King George V had responded to his son's letters with royal displeasure but not absolute refusal. Queen Mary, surprisingly, had expressed curiosity about the Indian woman who had captivated her son, requesting photographs and details of Parvati's education. It's not approval, Henry cautioned as they read the letters together in his study. But neither is it the categorical rejection we feared. Parvati traced the royal seal with her fingertip. What happens now? Now, he said, drawing her into his arms, I formally request permission to marry outside the traditional royal circles. And while we wait for that permission, I complete my diplomatic report, one that will recommend significant reforms to how the Raj functions. Combining personal and political revolution, she observed with a small smile. You don't do anything by half measures, do you? Not when it matters, he replied, kissing her softly. Winter brought a royal summons. Prince Henry was called back to London, officially to deliver his report on Indian affairs in person, unofficially to face royal scrutiny of his unprecedented matrimonial plans. The separation loomed before them like an abyss. Come with me, Henry urged as they stood in his quarters the night before his departure. Not officially, that would cause too much speculation. But follow in a few weeks. Meet my family. And if they reject me? Parvati asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her since he first spoke of marriage. Then we will build a life elsewhere, he said firmly. Canada, perhaps. or simply as private citizens somewhere neither British nor Indian society can dictate our choices. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating, to leave behind everything familiar, to face unknown challenges together. Yet as she looked at Henry, at the love and determination in his eyes, Parvati felt a certainty that had eluded her all her life. "Yes," she said. "I will come." 6 weeks later, Parvati stood on the deck of a steamship entering the Thames estuary, watching the grey shores of England emerge from the mist. Henry had sent trusted staff to escort her from India, arranging every detail of her journey with characteristic thoroughness. Now, as London approached, she clutched the railing and tried to calm her racing heart. A motor launch met the ship before it docked, a special accommodation that had the other passengers murmuring in curiosity. As Parvati descended to the smaller vessel, she saw a familiar figure waiting below, tall, broad-shouldered, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the weak winter sun. "Henry," she breathed as he helped her aboard, protocol forgotten as he pulled her into an embrace. "Welcome to England," he murmured against her hair. "Though it feels more like home now that you're here." As they motored toward a private dock, Henry filled her in on the weeks of negotiation with his family, with government officials, with the Church of England. There had been resistance, certainly, but also unexpected allies, his mother chief among them. "She read your father's books," he explained. "All of them. Then told my father that a woman raised by such a mind would bring only credit to the family." "And the king?" Parvati asked hesitantly. Henry's expression grew more measured. "He is coming to terms with the idea. The deciding factor, I think, was my threat to relinquish all titles and remove myself from Britain entirely." "You didn't," she gasped. "I did," he confirmed. "And meant every word. That's when my father realized this wasn't youthful rebellion or exotic infatuation, but something far more serious." A small private house in Richmond had been prepared for Parvati's stay, close enough to royal residences for convenience, but removed from the immediate scrutiny of court. There she would remain while final preparations were made, while the press was carefully managed, while the last objections were diplomatically overcome. 3 days later, dressed in a silk sari of deep blue embroidered with silver, Parvati was presented to the king and queen in a private audience. She had rehearsed the proper curtsies, the formal address, the careful responses to expected questions. What she hadn't prepared for was Queen Mary's directness. "You have caused quite a stir, Miss Nair," the Queen said after initial pleasantries. "My son speaks of you with a devotion I have rarely seen in him." "His Highness honors me with his regard," Parvati replied carefully. "Indeed." The Queen studied her with shrewd eyes. "And what do you offer him in return for this honor? What does a cook bring to a prince besides exotic tea?" The question could have been insulting, but something in the Queen's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than disdain. Parvati met her gaze steadily. "Perspective, Your Majesty. A view of the world beyond palace walls. And a heart that loves him for the man he is, not the title he bears." A moment of silence followed, broken by King George clearing his throat. "Forthright, isn't she?" he commented to his wife. "Necessarily so, I imagine," Queen Mary replied, the faintest hint of approval in her voice. "One would need forthrightness to manage our Henry." The rest of the audience passed in careful conversation about India, about Parvati's education, about her father's scholarly work. No mention was made of the proposed marriage, yet something in the royal couple's manner suggested that barriers were lowering, if not fully removed. As winter gave way to spring, London society gradually became aware of Prince Henry's unusual companion. Carefully orchestrated appearances at select functions allowed Parvati to be introduced to influential figures, progressive politicians, cosmopolitan aristocrats, respected intellectuals. Not all received her warmly, but enough did to create a small but significant circle of acceptance. Henry's diplomatic report on India, meanwhile, created its own stir in government circles. His recommendations for greater Indian participation in governance, for educational reforms, for a gradual path toward more autonomous rule were dismissed by some as naive but championed by others as visionary. "They're connecting the two issues," Henry told Parvati one evening as they walked through Richmond Park, away from prying eyes. "My personal choice and my political views. As though loving you has clouded my judgment on imperial matters." "Hasn't it?" she asked softly. "Changed your perspective, at least?" He considered this. "Perhaps. But for the better. You've helped me see beyond the narrow views I was raised with. And you've helped me believe in possibilities I never dared imagine," she replied, squeezing his hand. On a bright May morning, in a private chapel at Windsor Castle rather than the public spectacle of Westminster Abbey, Prince Henry Ellington married Parvati Nair in a ceremony that blended Anglican tradition with subtle elements of Indian culture. The guest list was small but significant: royal family members, select government officials, a handful of progressive aristocrats, and, most preciously to Parvati, her father. Rajiv Nair, traveling outside India for the first time in his life, watched with undisguised emotion as his daughter was wed to a British prince. When he placed her hand in Henry's, the gesture symbolized not just a father giving away his daughter, but something more profound, a hope that such unions might heal the divisions between their peoples. Queen Mary, observing the ceremony with regal composure, leaned toward her husband as the couple exchanged vows. "She brings him balance," she murmured. "And courage of a different sort than we taught him." King George harumphed softly, but his expression as he watched his son was more thoughtful and disapproving. The newlyweds would not occupy a traditional royal residence, nor would Parvati bear the highest royal titles. Instead, they would establish a home that straddled worlds, a place where British and Indian traditions could coexist, where diplomatic gatherings could feature both cucumber sandwiches and perfectly spiced chai. "Are you disappointed?" Henry asked his bride as they stood alone for a moment after the ceremony, before facing the small but distinguished reception. "That our marriage comes with compromises, with limitations." Parvati reached up to touch his face, this man who had crossed oceans and centuries of tradition to make her his wife. "How could I be disappointed? We have created something that didn't exist before, a bridge between worlds." "A bridge built on love," he said, covering her hand with his. "And tea. Let's not forget the tea." She laughed, the sound echoing in the ancient chapel like a promise of joy to come. "I will make you tea every day of our lives, if you wish it." "The only thing I wish," he said, drawing her close, "is you. Everything else, titles, positions, politics, is secondary to that simple truth." As they emerged into the spring sunshine, ready to begin their unconventional life together, Parvati thought of the journey that had brought them here, from a palace kitchen in Delhi to a royal chapel in Windsor. It had begun with tea, with the simple act of serving something made with care and attention. But it had become so much more, a love that challenged empires, a union that suggested new possibilities for the world they inhabited. And as Henry's hand tightened around hers, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the prince and the cook who had served him far more than tea when he tasted true love.